On May 22, 2010, Air India Express Flight 812 was on its final approach to Mangalore. The skies were clear, but something seemed off. The plane was flying too fast, coming in at a steep angle, and the runway at Mangalore was shorter than most, with a 200-foot cliff at the end. Inside the cockpit, the first officer noticed the danger. He warned the captain once, then again, and again, telling him to go around. But the captain didn't respond. The plane kept flying toward the runway, the cliff just beyond it growing closer by the second. Every moment that passed pushed the aircraft closer to danger. Passengers were unaware of the tension in the cockpit. They believed they were seconds away from a smooth landing. Some probably prepared for the familiar shock of the wheels hitting the runway. But this time, that shock would never come the way they expected. Just moments before landing, something went terribly wrong. No one on board could have predicted what was about to happen. This is the story of Air India Express 812. It was a quiet night at Dubai International Airport. The clock showed 10 p.m. Among the steady sound of planes and airport announcements, Air India Express Flight 812 was getting ready for its trip. The plan was simple. Take off from Mangalore at 9:35 p.m., land in Dubai at 1 a.m., take off from Dubai again at 2:45 a.m., and return to Mangalore by 6:30 a.m. The aircraft was a Boeing 738HG, not just any Boeing 737, but a special model equipped with a short-field performance package. This meant it was designed to handle tricky landings, especially at airports with short or challenging runways, like Mangalore International Airport. The plane carried the registration VTAXV and the serial number 36,333 identifiers that linked it to every flight it had ever taken. In the cockpit, the main pilot was Captain Zlatko Glušica. He was a 55-year-old pilot with dual citizenship in Serbia and the United Kingdom. He was no rookie. With over 10,000 hours of flying experience, including 2,440 hours on the Boeing 737, he was seen as a seasoned professional. Though not based in Dubai, Captain Glušica was familiar with Mangalore's airport, having landed there 16 times before. Beside him was First Officer Harbinder Singh Ahluwalia, 40 years old, from Mumbai. He had joined Air India Express in 2009 after working at Jet Airways. With 3,620 total flight hours, 3,319 of them on the Boeing 737. Ahluwalia was also well experienced. Mangalore wasn't new to him either. He had flown there 66 times. Alongside the two pilots, there were 4 flight attendants. Their job was to check the cabin, go through safety routines, and assist the 160 passengers boarding the plane. Some returning home, others traveling for work or vacation. At exactly 10:06 p.m. local time, Flight 812 pushed back from the gate and took off from Dubai International Airport. Everything seemed normal. An experienced crew, a strong plane, and a short flight ahead. But something in the air felt a little off. It was hard to explain, just a strange feeling. And soon, that feeling would start to grow. The night of May 21, 2010, began like any other flight for Captain Z. Glušica, but there was a lot more going on behind the scenes than anyone could have imagined. Captain Glušica had just returned from a 2-week break in Serbia. His body clock was completely out of sync due to the time zone difference, and he was feeling the effects. Serbia is 3.5 hours ahead of Dubai, which meant that even though it was late at night in Dubai, his body felt like it was earlier in the day. This jet lag left him feeling exhausted and disoriented. In an attempt to feel more alert, he suppressed a yawn and asked the stewardess for coffee. But the fatigue that was gradually taking over could not be completely overcome by caffeine. He was stressed out from a last-minute shift change in addition to being exhausted from jet lag. Captain Glušica wasn't supposed to be flying that night. He had planned to stay off duty, but the airline had called him the day before and asked him to switch shifts with another pilot. It was a last-minute request, and though he agreed to help out, it meant he was flying when he wasn't fully prepared. This kind of last-minute change was common at Air India Express in 2010. The airline scheduled its flights using pen and paper, which left little margin for mistakes. This old-fashioned approach often resulted in pilots working too much and feeling tired, which made them more likely to slip up. Being tired poses a known danger in flying. It impacts a pilot's ability to make choices and slows down how they react. Captain Glushicha was no different. He found it hard to keep his eyes open and stay sharp during the trip. The many hours of travel, plus his messed up sleep pattern, were hurting his ability to think. To make things worse, Mangalore Airport didn't have a doctor on hand. Rules say pilots should get checked out before a flight to make sure they're okay to fly. But in Mangalore, Air India Express had no one to do these checks. So, pilots had to say they were fit themselves, meaning they had to declare they were good to go even if they weren't feeling great. This system left room for dangerous assumptions, and in this case, Captain Glushika's fatigue went unnoticed. These factors created a perfect storm of issues that would play a role in the disaster that followed. The combination of tiredness and poor decision-making could have been avoided, but with no safeguards in place, it set the stage for what was to come. Air India Express Flight 812 took off from Mangalore at 9:35 p.m., heading towards Dubai. The plane was a Boeing 737-800, which is specially designed for shorter runways. This is important because Mangalore's runway is shorter and tricky to land on, so the plane's design was a good fit for this kind of airport. However, the flight took place at a difficult time during the circadian low hours, between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. This is when most people feel the most tired, and the risk of making mistakes is higher. Since the pilots had already been awake for a while and were traveling across different time zones, they were both feeling the effects of fatigue. About an hour into the flight, Captain Zlatko Glushika fell asleep in the cockpit. This left First Officer Harbinder Ahluwalia to handle everything by himself. Normally, two pilots work together in the cockpit to manage the flight, but now Ahluwalia had to do it all flying the plane and communicating with air traffic control. This was a huge responsibility, and the workload was overwhelming. First Officer Ahluwalia had to keep everything under control, and there was no one else to help or give advice. As the plane was getting closer to Mangalore, where the airport conditions were dangerous, the situation became even more serious. Mangalore Airport, located in southern India, has one of the most difficult and dangerous runways in the world. This airport features a tabletop runway, which means that the landing strip is situated on a plateau surrounded by steep cliffs on all sides. This makes it an extremely challenging environment for pilots, especially when the weather is poor or visibility is low. The Mangalore runway measures 150 meters across and stands as a much smaller width than standard commercial airport runways. Landing and takeoff operations become difficult for Boeing 737-800 aircraft and other large aircraft at this location. The plane must stop entirely before reaching the 250-foot drop-off which exists at the runway's final point. Any error made during the landing process could result in disastrous outcomes, including the plane flying off the edge and falling from height. Mangalore Airport faces a major problem because its runway safety area has become excessively overgrown. The runway safety area located at its terminal should remain free of obstacles to enable safe landing and takeoff aborts, but remained improperly cleared. The plane would be unable to stop on time in case of a landing malfunction due to unattended maintenance. Additionally, Mangalore's air traffic control ATC had limited capabilities. There was no functioning radar at the airport, making it difficult for ATC to track flights accurately. This could lead to delays in providing critical information to pilots, especially in complex situations like this one. Mangalore also has a strict policy. Only the captain is allowed to land the aircraft. First officers are only allowed to monitor the situation, which adds another layer of pressure. In this case, Captain Glushitsa was in charge of the landing, but his fatigue and lack of attention played a significant role in the failure to manage the approach properly. This restriction on who can land means that the pilot has full responsibility for the plane's safety. But in situations where there are concerns, the first officer has limited options for taking over or challenging decisions made by the captain. The final approach to Mangalore's runway 24 was the most critical moment of Flight 812's journey. At 5:33 a.m., the plane started its approach towards the runway, but the conditions were far from ideal. The runway, which was already known for its dangerous characteristics, was further complicated by unstable and hazardous conditions. As the plane neared the runway, the approach angle was 9 degrees, which is significantly higher than the standard approach angle for landing. This meant that the plane was coming in at a much sharper angle, reducing the margin for error significantly. If the plane didn't align properly with the runway, It could lead to an overshoot or an inability to stop in time. Also, the plane was also coming in at excessive speed. This created an even more dangerous situation because the plane wouldn't have enough runway to slow down and come to a safe stop. The first officer, who had been taking on more duties, recognized the danger immediately. He made a crucial call to Captain Glushika, urgently advising him to initiate a go-around. A go-around is a standard procedure where the aircraft aborts its current landing attempt and climbs back into the air to try again. It is often the best solution when the approach is too risky or unstable. However, Captain Glushika did not respond to the first officer's call. This left the plane on a dangerous and irreversible path. The failure to take corrective action, such as initiating the go-round, meant that the plane was heading straight towards a risky landing with no way to recover from the potential disaster. The final moments of Air India Express Flight 812 were tragic. The plane was following the proper landing procedure at first, and Air Traffic Control, ATC, didn't notice anything wrong in their communication. But things went terribly wrong as the plane approached the runway. The flight was using the Instrument Landing System, ILS, to land on runway 24, which had been extended in 2006. The pilot reported that they were on the correct path about 4.3 miles from landing and received clearance to land when they were 2,000 feet away. The plane touched down 5,200 feet down the runway, leaving only 2,800 feet for it to stop. Unfortunately, the plane couldn't stop in time. It overran the runway, going through a 90-meter, 300 feet, sand arrestor bed, but that didn't slow it down enough. The plane continued and hit the concrete base of the ILS antenna. It then went off the runway and fell down a steep hill at the end of the runway, around 790 feet past where it should have stopped. When the plane hit the ground, it caught on fire and soon the wreckage was covered in smoke. Television footage from shortly after the crash showed the remains of the aircraft on fire and lying on its belly with smoke rising from the wreckage. The minister also stated that weather conditions were normal, with a visibility of 3.7 miles, and said wind conditions were calm, with no rain at the time of the crash. A drizzle started only after the accident. In total, 158 people died in the crash. It became the deadliest crash involving a Boeing 737 at the time. Initially, reports suggested that 8 people survived, but confusion arose after a young girl was rescued by firefighters and later died on the way to the hospital. Karnataka Home Minister V.S. Acharya initially stated that survivors had been found, but this was later refuted by Air India. They confirmed that all survivors were alive, except for the girl who passed away due to her injuries. On 27 July 2010, the names of all the victims were inscribed on a memorial installed near the crash site, which was destroyed by vandals on 5 October 2010. Even though the weather was clear and calm, the crash shows how dangerous the conditions at Mangalore airport were and how bad decisions and safety problems led to this disaster. The crash remains one of the deadliest air accidents in India's history,